The Elliot Rodger case brought forth a lot of issues, brought a lot of issues to light, not just in society at large, but also in the manosphere and what's going on. Almost simultaneously as these events took place, feminists took advantage of this and decided to refer to Elliot Rodger as an MRA. Now, clearly, he wasn't. I'm not really too fond of most MRAs I've encountered, especially the ones from Voice for Men. But he clearly wasn't an MRA. But that's not really the point. I think what the Elliot Rodgers case has revealed to all of us is that MGTOW really is the path forward for men in their totality. That's my firm conviction right now. You have to look at it this way. He's being called an MRA, the deceased spree killer Elliot Rodgers. And of course, MRAs have to go fight back and repudiate the evidence or the accusations rather that are being made towards them that he was somehow part of the MRA, and it goes back and forth. And we see this all the time. MRAs dox feminists, feminists fight back. It's a never-ending battle. It's a lose-lose battle, and it's pretty pointless. They're not getting anywhere. They're certainly not changing laws, and of course you're going to have the various Voice for Men trolls come onto this possibly, such as Dean Esme, saying, I agree with 90% of what you're saying, but blah, 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 and I don't agree with that. Or, you got this wrong. Or they'll say, well, it's not just about changing laws, who cares? Look, they have a lot to deal with right now. They're going to have to deal with this for quite some time. I mean, if this is... The Elliot Rodgers case is probably the best weapon feminists have received in a long time to launch at so-called MRAs. So they're going to go back and forth and back and forth. And as Barbara Russell wisely once said, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. What matters is that lots of people are saying it. Yeah, it's the choir, right? And when the choir sings in a million voices, the truth gets buried under all of it. Doesn't matter. And I think this will also show just how useless the MRA is. Yeah, they might have, I think it was in Maine, helped a guy out. But the simple truth is the MRA is fighting for a lost cause. They're fighting for the mystical pair bond and marriage and the ability to have legal rights in government when, for example, in the United States and basically every other country in the world, there's a voting majority made up exclusively of women. It's amusing, and it's a bit sad. So that's going to go on back and forth, and this Elliot Rodgers case has just added fuel to the fire in this regard, and they're going to have their hands full. What are they going to do? I don't know, quite frankly, and I'm at the point now where I don't really care. There's not much MRAs are doing or probably will do, because these problems are so deep-seated that doxing a bunch of crazy feminists and creating posters to counter someone else's posters. I mean, what is that? Really, what is that? So the truth, whatever it might be, will be buried under the choir of millions of voices. The accusation is more important than what actually is, oftentimes, most of the time, especially when events reach mass media levels. And, of course, the Elliot Rodgers case has. It's part of mass media. And I'm sure there'll be people making comments on A Voice for Men and so on and so forth. And other people who claim to be MRAs will be making comments and trying to defend their position. And I'm mentioning this just to show how hollow it is what the men's rights activism as a concept stands for. I used to admire certain aspects of it. I used to admire Paul Elam. And I did accept his apology after he blew up at me like a 5-year-old and then went on and then apologized. But the only reason he apologized was because of the backfire that he got from subscribers of mine who happen to be men going their own way. I mean, it's hard to have faith in a person who's essentially just a 2-bit politician like everyone else. And then you have guys like Dean Esme who are effectively trolls these days, who come in and say, I agree with 90% or 80% of what you said, but, or you're wrong about that. I mean, what's the point of coming on to a MGTOW channel arguing with MGTOW? Go argue with your feminists. That's what you like to do most. And so all of this stuff that's happening, they're going to have to deal with it, and they're not going to be able to change anything, in my humble opinion. Not very much. But they'll have more publicity, and publicity is good, right? As the illustrious Sandman once said, all publicity, even bad publicity, is good. And speaking of Sandman, I'll say his name out loud, let me say something else. And this video is essentially about what MGTOW is and the path we're on. You see, it seems to me that the events that occurred in California recently really have shown us that MGTOW, in its legitimate form, is the optimal path forward for men. And I would even be bold enough to say for the vast majority of men. I mean, gone are the days that this fantasy of wedded bliss that was promised to men is even remotely tenable. These days are long, long gone. And, of course, there are different reasons for going your own way. There are different MGTOW. Some men would get back to the plantation in a heartbeat, as long as they fix the laws. But as Barbarossa, once again, I'm paraphrasing here, said, I mean, that's the best we can do, fix the laws so women can stop being mean to us? I mean, it's pathetic. It really is. It's fucking pathetic. And why is MGTOW the best way going forward? I'll tell you. It's quite simple. You see, there's a difference between boycotting something and protesting something and ignoring something. If you want to boycott a certain product, you probably want to boycott it because, well, you don't like the company, or you want the product to be cheaper, or for whatever reason related to that. But once the company gives in to your demands, you just go right back to buying the product and supporting the company. That's essentially what a lot of men going their own way are doing, in my opinion. You might not want to hear that, and I'm used to saying things that people don't want to hear and getting negative feedback for that, but that's the case. Waiting to go back to the plantation, and it's unlikely that'll ever happen. I think even the men waiting on the plantation know that, is effectively boycotting a product, waiting for the price to go down so you can go back to buying and engaging in your consumerism. The difference here between that and men who go their own way for the sake of the greatest prize that men can ever achieve, that is personal freedom, is that we're not boycotting anything, we're ignoring it completely. Let me give you an analogy. Now, you might have heard of the Walkman. This is a product that was quite prominent in the 80s and possibly in the early 90s, but even eclipsed in the early 90s. Many of you younger folk might not know what a Walkman is. A Walkman was a portable audio device that you put a cassette in. You might not even know what a cassette is anymore. And you listen to it. It was basically a really primitive version of a MP3 player, effectively. You put a cassette in. You used to buy cassettes with music on them from various bands. You stuck it in and you listened to it. You see, what MGTOW have realized is that women and the goods they're selling, their sex, their bodies, and they tend to sell very little else, are effectively the Walkmen of the year 2014. I mean, MGTOW realized that there's no going back to the plantation, but more importantly, they realized that these goods aren't worth it to begin with. I mean, rather than boycotting something, imagine this. Imagine a company in 2014, mid-2014, coming out into the open and peddling a product, a major product, and their primary product being a Walkman in the year 2014, when we have digital MP3 players that can store dozens of gigabytes of material. We recognize that, and we're not interested in that. That's what women are. They are Walkmen of the 1980s in the year 2014 in an economic sense. They have no value. And more importantly, MGTOW are different from people such as Elliot Rodgers and True Force Loneliness guys. We don't hate women, but we don't love women either. We're just indifferent to them. And this indifference is the key, because this indifference is the key to the way forward. It's the way we're going to push past all these boundaries. Now, MRAs might argue, sure, men are, no matter what they are or where they are going to be affected by laws. Well, not if we don't get married. And yeah, feminism has infiltrated the educational institutions of Western nations. There's no doubt about that. But the great thing about going your own way is all of us, I ultimately believe, have a thirst for knowledge, a desire to understand the world. And that desire might be differentiated. Some of us just want to know the basics, and some of us want to get in depth. But we want to understand. We don't need to go to university. I've been to university a lot. It didn't really do a whole lot for me. I can tell you a bit about linguistics and some other stuff, but yeah. The greatest lessons I've learned are the ones I've taught myself via my desire to acquire knowledge. And that's a key aspect of MGTOW. And as my subscriber, Shu Xiao, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, wrote in the comments, MGTOW confuses people. Nobody really gets us. We're not angry. We're not bitter. We just are. We're doing our own thing. And we recognize the ultimate prize. The ultimate prize is personal freedom. Not being beholden to obligations thrust upon you by society at large. Not being beholden to responsibilities, one responsibility after the other, put upon you by in-laws, women, your wife, your girlfriends. For what? So you can fuck? Another sub of mine made a nice comment the other day as well. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, yeah, when he was in a relationship, he was basically suffering 23 hours a day and getting sex 1 hour a day. And that's all it is. You know, the church of sex, women, all this stuff, we're indifferent to it. We do our own thing, and we don't fucking give a fuck. And that's the most important thing. This will serve to confuse, and people won't get us. They can call us whatever they want to, and it won't matter, because we're always going to be doing our own thing. Now, this is important. Why? Because I believe the legitimacy of our message and the legitimacy of men going their own way is contained in the desire for freedom and the indifference to the opinions of others. And in contrast to some people, such as Sandman, who believe you need to market MGTOW like it's some cheap hair or skincare product, I think the truth, legitimacy, and the evidence of the message and the things we do and the communications we engage in is all these things are far more powerful than any marketing campaign. We don't need to market MGTOW like some cheap-ass product on sale at a garage sale. You know, this is what the Voice for Men does. This is what MRAs do. They want the publicity. People like Sandman want the publicity. That's great. You know, and I reserve the right to disagree with other people who are allegedly going their own way. Let me tell you why. Because in our very nature, it's our very nature as men to dissent. We don't consent. That's what women do. They just agree. They agree so they can harmonize and get along. We don't do that. If the truth is at stake, if something is important at stake, we dissent. We go our own way, whether we openly acknowledge that or not. So I'll tell you, we don't need to market MGTOW. We don't need to market a message. We don't need to market a philosophy or an individualistic way of life as if it were some cheap fucking product being sold at a garage sale like a used car salesman. It's fucking bollocks. It's bullshit. We don't need to do that. Because, once again, the most important thing, the most important aspect of our message is individual freedom. All of us are doing our own thing, and we stop giving a fuck. Therein lies the power, therein lies the rub. What's the world going to do? What's the world going to do in a few short decades from now, assuming we're all still alive, when more and more men wake up, start doing their own thing, start choosing freedom, and most importantly, stop giving a fuck? You don't need to market stop giving a fuck. You don't need to market freedom. You see, men, and I believe this firmly, ultimately, when the stakes are so high, will choose freedom over all the responsibilities and accolades that women and society and the rest of the world can thrust upon them. Remember that inner conflict we've all experienced and all had. Men going their own way have evolved past that, most of us at least. We've evolved to the point where freedom is the number one thing in this game. We don't think about the struggle, the bull and rut, as Barbarossa once put it. We don't think about that anymore, at least I don't. I just think about all the things I can do in my life on my own time with my freedom. And you don't need to market freedom. You don't need to sell it like it's some cheap-ass product. And you don't need to market or sell something as, in my opinion, as profound, but also as self-evident as choosing to go your own way, to go your own way for the sake of freedom. Because it's right there. I mean, once you've realized these things, you know that there's no other alternative. You can't even go back. Even if you've been waiting it out and holding out and waiting to go back to the plantation to your slave masters so you can get your blowjobs and feel like you've accomplished something in life, in the eyes of others, in the eyes of women, in the eyes of society, in the eyes of the world, to make your ego feel big. Even those men are beginning to realize it's too late. And they're beginning to taste the fruits of freedom. And that freedom is just incredible. If it were a meal, it would be ambrosia. And they're beginning to recognize it, and they're waking up, and they're realizing, holy shit, why did I ever want to go back to the plantation to begin with, even if they changed the laws tomorrow? Would you be safe? Would you be safe from a nagging wife who would make your life miserable, whether you could be punished legally for altercations with her or not? No. You wouldn't be safe. You'd be living a life of misery, constant nagging, and for what? Well, because you ejaculated in her and you have some progeny running around? Good for you. Huge accomplishment. No. Freedom is the ultimate message, and that's the ultimate message of MGTOW. It doesn't need to be marketed. It doesn't need to be sold like some cheap good. That's not it, because it's so internal. It's so inherent, and I'd argue congenital to the nature of man, that we don't need all these other things. We don't need all these other trappings. We don't need marketing. Let the MRAs do that. Let the Sandmen do that. We just need to do our own thing for our own sake. We need to keep on spreading the message. We need to talk about it. We need to further investigate. We need to further understand. That's the nature of MGTOW. Now, like I said, you might think MGTOW is one thing, or I might think it's another, but at the end of the day, MGTOW is a state of awareness. Some of us might just be aware of certain things, or only want to be aware of certain things. Maybe you don't want to know what Homo erectus was doing that led to certain forms of human Homo sapien behavior. It's entirely possible. I do. So there are different levels of awareness. It doesn't matter, though. That thirst for knowledge is the embodiment of what it means to be a man. That desire for freedom is the embodiment of what it means to be a man. All of these things, they come together. That's why I see MGTOW, in Western nations at least, as a form of future for men. Now, I'm not talking specifically about reproduction. I'm talking about a mental future, a future of the mind, as I like to say in German, a future of the geist. Because you get these guys like PUAs who, they're creating the problem. They're fueling the problem. They're funneling all this shit into the problem. They're servants of the church. I mean, this is voluntary excommunication we're engaging in. They're servants of the church. True force loneliness guys who are just angry and bitter and who would, without batting an eyelash, turn the other way just so to serve their female masters just because, well, they can't get laid, and should a woman be so kind as to grant access to her pussy to them, you can be sure they'd be gone. And MRAs who just enjoy arguing with feminists about nonsense and doxing them and whatever. We don't care about any of that. We don't give a fuck. We're moving forward. We're going our own way. Freedom is the message. Preach it, brothers. Take care.